Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchball, and this is our series of interviews on the idea of strategy. And so today we're interviewing Wayne Barz, Chief Investment Officer for Ben Franklin Technology Partners, longtime friend, colleague, and someone that I always come to for advice and input myself. We've known each other both business-wise and personally for quite a while. So, Wayne, why don't you give us a little intro on yourself?
Yep. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for bringing me on here. As you said, both have the Lehigh connection going way back. I think maybe in my screen you can see a Lehigh blanket behind me. I don't see any Lehigh props behind you, but
not at the moment, no.
Not at the moment. As you said, I'm Chief Investment Officer at Ben Franklin Technology Partners of Northeastern Pennsylvania. We're a state-funded nonprofit technology-based economic development group in Pennsylvania. In particular, we work in the northeast part of Pennsylvania. Essentially, we provide direct investment, advice, connections to networks of people like you, Jamie, to technology-based startups, innovative manufacturers in that region, all with the mission of creating high-paying jobs in the region.
Well, that's great. And I think, in terms of strategy, of course, you have the strategy of Ben Franklin itself, but when making an investment, you have to assess the strategy of the investment target. And then, especially in dealing with a lot of startups, their strategy can pivot sometimes 2 or 3 times in a year. And so the opportunity to exercise that muscle and the cadence of exercising that strategic muscle is very high in your line of work, which makes you a great candidate for these interviews. So just to start, I think this is a good broad question to begin with, because there's so many ways to do this. But when we say the word strategy, how do you define strategy? What does a strategy look like to you?
So, and maybe there's two parts to that. I think strategically, internally with Ben Franklin, some of that in a way is dictated to us, right? So the way that the program is created, we work in 21 counties in Northeast PA. So that begins to limit, I often say the world is not our oyster. Northeast PA is our oyster. So geographically, our strategy is already narrowed down. And, often I'm envious of some other areas like the greater Philadelphia area that can have multiple programs focused specifically, for instance, on the life science industry. And so you can start to do many things that are very focused on helping those kinds of companies. I think in Northeast PA, we would struggle if we focused in an industry sector. And so strategically, partly by default, I think we look at a broad range of industry types, companies. We're really, I suppose, I don't know if it's strategic, but it's certainly, maybe it's tactical. We need to react to what walks in the door. And get prepared and get ourselves educated on those particular industries. So we don't set out strategically to look for a particular industry, but rather do more reaction. Now, when we're coaching our companies, of course, I think the messaging is a little bit different. And I think, again, we're in the early stage companies, we're working with 2-person companies. So strategy is happening inside one 200 square foot room, as opposed to any sort of global team that are far flung and providing input and insight from around the world in different functional areas. It's 2 folks in a room typically. And I think strategy most often comes down to gut. And you talked about pivoting and shifting focus. And I think the best entrepreneurs that we've seen have a good gut for when to pivot and when to stay the course. And sometimes that doesn't, I suppose like all companies, you don't know whether the strategy pays off until 12 months down the road and you see the result of it. We've seen too many companies, too many entrepreneurs go to a trade show and come back, and all of a sudden, because somebody stopped at the booth and said, what you ought to do is you ought to think about this, and they come back and they're a completely different company.
Mhm.
Too much pivoting is a real problem. And of course, not pivoting at the right times is a problem. So, I think in order to help our founders think through their strategy, I think it's a lot of probing as to why are you thinking, in a certain way and with a certain market focus.
Yeah, very interesting. And going from what you talk about with Ben Franklin and Philadelphia versus Northeast Pennsylvania, strategy can be positioning, like focusing on a sector. It can also just be a pattern, like, okay, stuff comes in. How do you react becomes your strategy to the various things coming in through your door, and that certainly helps shape yours. Um, Especially in relation to that gut and how you support your founders inside your portfolio. Um, you touched on various pieces of this, but is strategy a process? Is it a decision or outcome, or is it a way of thinking? And does it depend? I guess as a follow on that is, does it depend on the individual or the circumstance as to what the right answer to that question is?
I think that is absolutely true. I mean, I guess if I had to generically answer the question, I would think of strategy as a process, and it's happening every minute inside the founding team's collective brain, and it's reaction to tactics, I think. So you've got a strategy today. This is the segment of the marketplace we're going to go after, and these are the tools we're going to use to go after that, and these are the outcomes that we hope to get. And you've got to be absorbing the feedback on a on a minute by minute basis, and then that's got to inform the strategy, I think, as to what we do tomorrow. And again, I think that comes, we try to coach the companies to not jump around a lot, to try to stay the course for at least, we said at the beginning of this particular approach to a market, for instance, we're going to give it 6 weeks. It's going to culminate in a show or a release of the product. You've got to give it some time to work. Now, the imperatives around these companies sometimes is, you and I were talking before we started to record, a lot of companies have less than 30 days of cash.
Mhm.
And, especially when you're talking about a team of two, there's no other income coming in, or maybe a spouse is working, maybe not. And so strategy becomes a much more short-term thing, and opportunism starts to get in the way of good strategy, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, that's very interesting about the duration that you need to sort of test an idea or see if the strategy's right. Um, would you say that's more driven by internal factors, like how much cash you have to test a strategy, or external factors such as, well, we need to get to this point, make this strategy last for this long to validate whether it's true or not? So, and again, maybe that depends on the how strong either one of those are.
Yeah, and certainly both of those are involved. If I had to pick one with more weight, it would probably be the external factors, I think, need to inform the strategy um, more. I this morning, we're living through this pandemic at this point, and I heard the CEO of Target on television. They had a $300 million capital renovation program underway. The Target near us there's trailers all over the place, and they've sort of put all of that on hold, as now he claims they've invested this money instead in their employees and in their team during this time, higher wages, keeping people on, et cetera. And it goes right back to the Mike Tyson thing. Everybody's got a strategy until you get punched in the mouth. And so I think, the external factors can be a real punch in the mouth, and just have to inform that, that strategy and how you think about going to market.
Good, good. So as we think about who has to have this strategic thinking capability, we see across a lot of larger corporations, they go through programs of defining the capabilities they want their employees to have. Strategic thinking often makes the list, whether it's for all employees or at least managers. You deal with a lot of founders, and they really end up with you have technology-oriented founders, you have market-oriented founders, you have financial-oriented founders. There's a broad range just in that category of founder. Who really needs the strategic thinking? Is it for everyone? Does every CEO even need to have it, or does every manager need to have
I certainly think every founder, every CEO has to have it. And I would say, if we can simplify the world into two types of founders that we've seen, something I didn't mention at the top is that we run this incubator physical space where we've got more than 30 companies in it at any given time, all sorts of technology types from life science to enterprise software and advanced materials. And so we see a lot of teams that go from 2 people to 20, 25 people in the building. I'd say there's probably, grossly simplified, 2 camps. Those that like to run that startup as a commune, they prefer to have everybody in the same room and all ideas are exposed to everybody all the time. And then we also see clients that absolutely the CEO has a separate private office from where most of the rest of the team works. And I think both can be just fine, but I've seen both work. I've seen both fail. So it totally depends on that individual. I know I never tried to steer a company into one approach or the other, because it's got to fit their personality. It's hard. I don't know that it ever gets easy, but when you're 7 people, it's pretty hard to also be trying to change your personal approach to team building and organization development while you're trying to get a first product, get a first customer or third customer or whatever. So we try to observe those things, and you try to help the founder make the most of what they've got. Again, I think it kind of comes back to, we aren't able to be as selective in the clients that we bring on board. The amount of money that we invest is not enough, for instance, to go out and scour New York and New Jersey and try to attract the very best, like a venture capital firm would. We need people that are already here or that have some other personal strategic reason for being here. And so we have to play the cards that we're dealt. The most important thing, I think, is there has to be a mechanism. So if you're command and control CEO, you had still better have a mechanism for listening and then processing and then communicating. So you become a very much of a communication supply chain in a way. So you can't go off and make up all of your own decisions and then come back and not effectively communicate that. So to me, that's part of the process, and that can work for whichever kind of founder you are, whether you're the commune or the command and control type.
Yeah. So, you're also in a unique position with the incubator to be more engaged. You don't have to go visit.
Yeah.
At least as an organization, whether you personally or other people in the Ben Franklin team. So just a specific follow-up as it relates to what Ben Franklin does, knowing that it is important for each and every one of your founders to have that strategic thinking capability, what does your organization do to help enhance that, to enable it, to enhance it, to coach it, whatever? What are the mechanisms that you try to incorporate to help?
Well, yeah, I suppose there are a few things. One, we try to maintain a large network of experts in a host of different fields. I mean, all the different kinds of fields that you might expect, from sales and marketing expertise to regulatory affairs, um, the standard legal and accounting professional help, because we don't have all the capabilities needed, and we don't. I mean, we don't have the size of the staff to be able to really deliver sort of daily interaction with every single company. So we need to find experts, and we work hard to try to make the chemistry fit between the company and the advisor. So we don't drive any particular advisor at a company. We introduce them to three or four, they pick one, and we set up the meeting, and so the chemistry has to kind of fit. um, we do something we call tiger sessions, which is typically when a company has been out there long enough to have had a significant amount of market exposure and is learning things are either really working and wow, how do we manage this growth? Or things have not been working, what should we do? And so we'll bring three or four of our sort of cream of the crop advisors in, especially knowledgeable around that topic, and spend 3 hours with the team, and really just let them hear some other voices. um, One of the other things we try to do, and often comes out of that tiger session, is let's make sure, and this isn't right for every company, but let's get an advisory board around the company that can meet a few times a year at least and get those other voices. Again, it's different than a board of directors. Anybody probably watching this knows that there's a difference, but these people don't have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders or anybody. They're just there as truly advisors. Um, it's just so good to just get somebody to bounce the facts off of and hear from other experienced people.
Yeah, so that's good enablement, and I'm sure there's a case by case fit, as you said, finding the right fit and allowing those founders to still own those decisions around how they incorporate that help is, I think, important because they have to own it ultimately. Um, it does lead to another question just around how many people can you include in strategic planning. Um, can you have too many cooks in the kitchen? As you talk about the two types, those that are more isolated, those that are more commune oriented, um, is how many people are involved a personal style choice, or is there a better process, or is there a point in time? How do you get the right amount of input without diluting it so much that you lose some ownership and decision making?
I think probably ultimately strategy, the end strategy, is what comes out of the CEO's mouth. And so, right up until the moment that it leaves the brain and comes out the mouth, I think the leader of the organization owns the strategy. The bigger issue there is, are they listening to the outside voices, right? I mean, in a way, everything impacts strategy. How my wife's day went has an impact on, and it may be subtle, but so I think, you know in the end, we try to bring more outside voices to that CEO's brain, so that they are processing a strategy with as many people as they can. Um, what they do with it ends up inside their brain, and it rolls around, and then what comes out of their mouth is the end goal. I mean, any CEO of even a giant company, in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Welch, master of corporate strategy, um, listened to thousands of people and voices, but in the end, he had to get up in front of people and say the words. So I think if there are founders listening to this, I think be sure you're getting all the good input, and use your brain to process good advice from bad advice, sort it out. Just because somebody's brilliant and has had a lot of success doesn't mean that they've got the right advice for you and your situation. I hate the Twitter feed with all of these experts that have had, started and grown a successful business and exited it. And they've got this sort of generic advice that I hear repeated back in my office by a CEO that says, oh, so-and-so said this and we're going to pursue that. It's like that person has no sense of the context of the world that you're living in. It may be good advice to think about and process, but don't necessarily repeat it, I think is what I've said that a million times in my office to founders that show up with all of these expert pieces of advice from people that don't know their context.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a last question, or at least second to last, of that part of where the strategy is what comes out of the CEO's mouth. I've met founders and worked with founders and CEOs where on one extreme, they can articulate the strategy in a very articulate way, a very clear way, one that inspires investors, but the employees don't know how to bring it to life. And then on the other end, I've worked with CEOs and founders who can make 100 decisions that greatly execute a strategy, but the employees are left figuring out, putting 100 decisions together and trying to interpret what the strategy is. And so those are the two extremes, but fundamentally, based on what you think works and what you advise, what is the best ways to get that decision, that what comes out of the CEO's mouth, into execution, into action?
Well, and that also comes back a little bit to that personality type of the CEO, and understanding so the CEO needs to understand their strengths and weaknesses with regard to communication style is one thing. I think we probably, as you talk about that, I think about that most with regards to sales. In our world, we've got a founder. The founder's doing the first sales. In fact, the founder's usually doing the first 10 or 15 sales. Mm-hmm. A danger zone occurs when we hear a founder show up, and because they don't have sales background, first thing we're going to do is hire a salesperson. And it's like, there is no way that that's going to work. That's probably an exaggeration, right? But for the most part, until that founder has been out and dealt with the feedback from a prospective customer personally, processed it, figured out how to overcome objections, you don't know. Now, if you're going to hire a salesperson before you're able to communicate that salesperson's going to go out and going to come back and say, I don't know, boss, it's just not working. Mm-hmm. They're not buying it. And you never know, is it the salesperson? Is it the product? Is it the customer set? Because you haven't lived through it yourself. And so I think, not sure it's answering the question directly, but living it helps you communicate it. And, so I think it comes down probably in the end to personal style and experience level, as to whether you can effectively communicate to the team, whatever it is, development. If it's software development, like, look, here's how we're going to manage cycles of development. Here's how we're going to manage the sales cycle process. Living it, living through those things helps, I think, make you a better communicator of it.
Great. Well, this is very helpful. I think you kind of painted a picture of a very personally invested strategy, as whether it's process, whether it's decisions, whatever, it still is from the inside out. It's got to be owned, led, lived by the CEO, particularly if that's a founder CEO. So any last words before we wrap up?
Strategy is important, but we see it every day. Strategy ends up on the PowerPoint pitched to investors. It's the execution side that really matters. And so, you know, if there's founders watching this, right, the way you write an email, the way you return a phone call, the way you answer the phone, the words you use on the website, all of those things, you know, are about the execution. And one of the beauties of being in an incubator physically with a lot of our companies is you get to see them on a very regular basis, and you get to see them interact with other people. And so you start to learn where to, if you're going to try to coach them on personal style, where to try to help them. Um, I don't know if that was parting last words or not, but execution eats strategy for lunch, I think, might be the conclusion.
Yep, I would agree with that. So, well, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone found this helpful. I know I did, and wish you the very best.
Thanks. Thank you, Jamie. This was fun.